This is the X-Zone Broadcast Network, broadcasting worldwide on broadcast affiliates and satellite program providers, including CNN Broadcast Network, Sirius Satellite Network, Star Media, Good News Radio Network, Angel Broadcast Network, Wiki Broadcast Network, and WPBN TV. For more information on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, visit us at www.xzbn.net.
This is A Different Perspective with Kevin Randle. A retired U.S. Lieutenant Colonel, Kevin Randle has been studying UFOs for nearly 50 years. Kevin has investigated some of the most famous UFO cases in the world and has been consulted for dozens of documentaries about UFOs. Considered one of the leading experts into the Roswell UFO Crash of 1947, Kevin has written more than 25 books about UFOs, including the recently published Roswell in the 21st Century. Now, here's the host of A Different Perspective, Kevin Randle.
And good evening. I am back after my hiatus. It is A Different Perspective, and I truly am Kevin Randle. I thought you'd all want to know that before we got started. The other thing you should know is, according to my precise calculations, I've been doing this for a year. The first show was recorded back on August 17th to be aired on August 20th. So this has been a long run for me, I guess. I don't know. I am joined by Don Schmitt, whom I've known for eons. And speaking of that, I probably ought to have that introduction changed. It says I've been investigating UFOs for 50 years. Maybe we ought to change it to like 50 minutes or something, so it doesn't sound like I'm old and decrepit here. Anyway, I'm here with Don Schmitt. And as I said, I've known him for quite a long time. He still resides in his native Wisconsin on a 48-acre ranch located just outside Milwaukee in Hubertus. He has a bachelor's degree from Concordia University and has taken graduate courses in criminal justice at St. John's University. He has worked for the US Postal Service for 23 years. He has also worked as a freelance medical and commercial illustrator. He is the former director of special investigations and a co-director of the J. Allen Hynek Center for UFO Studies. As I say, he teamed with me in 1988. It was his idea, not mine, to investigate the Roswell UFO crash. And I think the thinking was that with a military background, I would be able to relate to some of the military people a little bit better than people who had not served in the military. Anyhow, we got together to research the Roswell UFO crash, and that resulted in 2 books, which were used by ShowTime for the original movie Roswell. He later teamed with Tom Carey, and the 2 of them have collaborated on a number of UFO books. I'm going to ask him about one specifically here when we get going, that have and most of them have Roswell as a main theme. He had appeared on dozens of television shows and radio programs and documentaries. He and his wife, Marie, have been married for 6 years now, I think.
No, it's about 12.
It's what?
It's been 12 years.
Oh, 12 years. My God, I'm not even close. Okay, 12 years.
And I can say, though, that it seems like 6. So, and
well, that's good.
That's good.
Yes, that's good. Well, welcome to A Different Perspective.
Well, thank you for having me back, and congratulations on your 1-year stint on this particular show, this particular program, and I wish you many more.
I'm not sure if that's a curse or an obligation there. I don't know. I think what we're going to talk about, I think we'll start off, and we're, of course, in the short segment here, but you, of course, were at the Roswell Festival here on beginning of July. Anything interesting going on down there this time around? It was the 70th anniversary of the Roswell crash.
Well, one of my disappointments was that I had hoped there would be a greater focus on Roswell, on it being, just as you say, the 70th anniversary. And yet it was still the standard fare of abductees and crop circles and other such, ancillary aspects of the UFO phenomenon.
Does that detract from the Roswell case at all?
Well, it detracts in the sense that I'd like to believe that as it is sponsored specifically by the International UFO Museum and Research Center, that they try to be all encompassing. They try to present all those varying degrees of interest. And as a result, they do attract people that for many reasons, have no interest in the Roswell case at all. They may be there strictly because they are into abduction, missing time cases, or crop circles, that type of thing. But as Bud Hopkins used to remind me, and I've repeated the quote myself, one mystery at a time. And I think it just tends to muddy the waters more than anything else.
Well, that was kind of what I was thinking too. You get off into all these ancillary topics, and ancient astronauts would be another subtopic, and cattle mutilations would be another subtopic. It does certainly muddy the waters. Well, we're coming up on our first break here, so we're going to take a short break. I'm with Don Schmitt here. We're talking about the Roswell Festival. When we come back, we'll talk a little bit about MUFON. I'll ask him if he's seen my post on General Exxon and some of the things I've learned in the last few weeks about that relates directly to Roswell. You can look for that posting at www.kevinrandle.blogspot.com and take a look at the other fine programs on the X Zone Broadcast Network, xzbn.net. We will be back right after this.
This is the X-Zone Broadcast Network, broadcasting worldwide on broadcast affiliates and satellite program providers, including CNN Broadcast Network, Sirius Satellite Network, Star Media, Good News Radio Network, Angel Broadcast Network, Wiki Broadcast Network, and WPBN TV. For more information on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, visit us at www.xzbn.net.
Did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or Wi-Fi, you can still listen to the X-Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell, The Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, X-1, Dimension X, Space Patrol, and every minute of the X-Zone Broadcast Network by calling 213-401-0080, courtesy of Audio Now. No smartphone, app, or internet needed. It saves your data plan, and it's free if you have unlimited minutes. Call 213-401-0080 to listen on any phone, anytime, anywhere. Remember 213-401-0080 for the best of the paranormal, parapsychology, and sci-fi radio programming anywhere, 24/7, 365.
And we have returned. I'm joined here high atop the beautiful Chrysler building in downtown Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. I don't know why I'm saying that. That's not true. I'm joined with Don Schmitt. We were talking about the Roswell Festival and some of the ancillary things going on. When you get to the festival, is Roswell a main theme, or is that kind of taken a back seat to some of these other things in today's world?
Oh, I observe that it's still a main theme, whether it's also by some of the other sponsored events, such as the city has their own speakers come in, and maybe another group or two, and they'll even bring skeptics in and try to present the opposing viewpoint. But the one thing I always remind all those participating at the museum is that, well, we still have the museum, that no matter what it takes to attract people to come into Roswell, then they at least make every effort to still go through the museum. I always encourage them to check out the library, which is the largest UFO book collection in the world, and then the research area as far as all of the files that are accessible. That's the wonderful thing about the museum in Roswell, that it's accessible, that you can come and spend hours, spend days if you would like, and have total access to the material.
I would argue that it's not accessible because it's in Roswell, New Mexico.
Oh yes, well, it is a destination city. Yes, yes.
You know, it's really not. Yeah, it's like 3 hours from El Paso and 3 hours from Lubbock and 3 hours from Albuquerque.
Well, you drove fast enough. We made Roswell in maybe 2.5 hours, right?
Yeah, I was following you.
Oh yes.
That's why I got the speeding ticket.
Yeah, but that's because you were ahead of me that time, and I pulled over as well, and he waved me past. You know, I'm not after you.
Oh. And I was driving a red Camaro, which didn't help.
That was the red. Red is always the most attractive as far as.
Well, now we've gotten off the beaten track, so to speak, which would be Roswell, I suppose. We talked a little bit about the festival. Did you have a chance to take a look at the article I just posted on General Exxon?
Yes, I did. And
because we both interviewed him, and he talked about these teams coming in. I should set this up, I suppose. These teams coming in from Washington, D.C., apparently, to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and he, as the base commander, and I always point out, that's kind of like the mayor of a city. He's got all these parts that he's responsible for. He was tasked with getting an airplanes ready and that sort of thing, and the teams would come in, they'd get on the airplane and go out and investigate UFOs. In the last week, actually, I was looking for something else in the Project Blue Book files and blundered onto this documents that talked about them creating two-man teams. Sorry, ladies, in that time frame, it was two-man teams who would be trained a little bit in investigating UFOs, and then they would be dispatched to the scene of a UFO activity. I think that's what Exxon was talking about. So it wasn't quite as grandiose as he was suggesting. What was your reaction to that?
Well, one suggestion, and if you recall, Exxon talked about how they arrived in civvies, and then they would change into their uniforms. He was of the impression they were all officers. I think, obviously, by their very uniform. But I guess what I would look into, Kevin, is remember the 3602nd Air Intelligence Squadron. And back in 1952, when they were essentially assigned to investigate the more serious UFO cases. And Hynek would even complain years later to us even that the hardcore cases were all going upstairs.
Well, I would say about the 4602nd Air Intelligence Service Squadron, their mission was to, looking at it from a Cold War point of view, was to interrogate downed Soviet airmen who had been shot down in bombing missions over the United States and be captured. And their mission was to go out and gather them up and interrogate them. And the reason they were plugged into the UFO investigations was here was a way they could practice their interrogation skills with civilians and that sort of thing to get information about where something might have happened or what direction it was going. So it was kind of a double-edged sword there. And I always got the impression they didn't do a whole lot. But
That we know of. I hearken back to when they came. There was a number of officers. Hynek had threatened to resign from Blue Book on a number of occasions. He was becoming frustrated. You will recall, as I had mentioned, the hardcore cases, not being brought to his attention. People think that Hynek was spending all of his free time down in Dayton, Ohio, during his Blue Book tenure, and which was not the case at all. He'd go down once a month and peruse through, case reports. But one thing that always struck him as unusual was the fact that he would, through the course of his travels, he would talk to both military and civilian pilots who would often confide to him about, scrambles, and he would talk to SAC officers who would talk about infiltrations and things. And so he was hearing, as far as sighting reports from, serious, highly trained military types, fully expecting that he would, go down to Blue Book and he'd find these case reports, and they were never to be found. So it always puzzled him as to, what was going on, where were they going? And so for his constant, threats to I'm off or you can fire me, this type of thing, it was a representative of the 4602nd who actually came and talked Hynek into staying on. And I remember him talking about that on one occasion. So to whose benefit did it serve keeping Hynek on as a consultant to Blue Book, essentially running interference, their scientific consultant, always being the first to the microphone to explain away every and any case that they could. And yet, I think Exxon clearly was describing another team. And as you yourself mentioned in your blog, that when it came to their final reports, when they returned back to Wright Pat, he never saw their reports. It was his impression they went back to Washington with whoever these people were.
I don't think they went to Washington, though. I think that the reports remained in Dayton at the ATEC, which evolved into the Foreign Technology Division, for those of you keeping score at home.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is, there is something in these reports that I was looking at just this week. There was something called the Aerial Phenomenon Group.
Yes.
Which had to do with UFO investigations, and they were sort of the organization railroading, conducting this new activity. And then there was another hierarchy above that, and the name of it escapes me at the moment, that suggested they were kind of pulling all these strings. So what concerns me about this is there seem to be levels of command structure above Blue Book where things were going, and yes. We've got some of the names. And I found some documents from the Aerial Phenomena Research Group that talks about some of the sightings. I was going to cross-check those with the Blue Book files, and I haven't had a chance to do that yet to see if the sightings talked about in these documents, which I believe were actually classified at the time. I think most of them were confidential as opposed to secret or something higher, but they were classified at the time, and I was going to cross-check those with the Project Blue Book files and see if they showed up in there, which would be something that I could do easily.
Absolutely. And I know you have a copy of the Blue Book file, and I would be very surprised should you come across any case reports, case investigations from FTD. And that would be an aside. And as the press and as even Hynek were of the impression that Blue Book was the sole priority investigation of UFOs at that time.
Well, the thing we ought to look at, first of all, is what we've learned here in just a few minutes on the program, is that there was something called Project Blue Book, which investigated UFOs, but there was another organization run by the Aerial Phenomenon Group, which had two-man teams that were going to go out and investigate UFOs, mostly in the western part of the United States, I think. There was the 4602nd, which was tasked at one point with investigating UFOs.
Yes, in fact, not to interrupt you, Kevin, I just came across, I just paged through this, and they even had a specific report dated January 3rd, 1953, Air Force Regulation 24-4, which stated specifically, in the case of any physical UFO evidence, you are to safeguard it and notify us. We will tell you what to do with it, end quote. And that's from the 4602nd.
And that, and then we learn about Project Moondust,
right?
which began in I think October of 1957, which was also tasked with retrieving
space debris, space junk, or
debris from a foreign manufacturer or unknown origin. Well, unknown origin clearly moves us into the UFO field. But here's what strikes me about this, and it's simply this: if the Air Force didn't care about UFOs, as Project Blue Book suggests after Ruppelt left, given the people who were picked to run the project, if they didn't care about it, why do we have all these other organizations who are also tasked with UFO investigations that really aren't talked about by the people at Project Blue Book and that sort of thing? We seem to have levels of bureaucracy, I guess, stacked above Blue Book that's gathering information. Why do we have all of that?
And you have a mid-level captain who is running the show at Blue Book, who certainly does not have access to anything classified top secret unless it's provided him. And to place oneself in Hynek's shoes, when you yourself are able to determine that there are other projects or there is another project that supersedes your own involvement, one can understand his frustration. He would say that he stayed on because he wanted to retain access to the data. Well, but again, it was still filtered data. He was still getting the mundane. He was still getting generally the cases that could be easily explained away. The hardcore cases, again, were going, and I think you're certainly on the right trail. And I've quoted you in the book on Right Path specifically because you're the first one that I ever heard actually question that people always assume that Blue Book was the end all as far as UFO investigations. Where are all the Army reports? Where are all the Navy reports? Is it safe to assume that they indeed would have had their own projects, their own investigations at that time? And one would, I think it's often been suggested that the Navy, who would have much greater surveillance on a global basis than the Air Force, that they would have much greater access to the phenomena on a global level.
Well, let me break in here because A, we've gotten kind of off track where I was going with this conversation, and B, we're getting close to our break here. I'm joined by Don Schmitt, as I said, high atop the beautiful Schuyler Building in downtown Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. No, I just made that up again. Don Schmitt's website is roswellinvestigators.com. You can take a look at information at my blog, www.kevinrandle.blogspot.com. We will be back right after this, so stick around.
This is the X-Zone Broadcast Network, broadcasting worldwide on broadcast affiliates and satellite program providers, including CNN Broadcast Network, Sirius Satellite Network, Star Media, Good News Radio Network, Angel Broadcast Network, Wiki Broadcast Network, and WPBN TV. For more information on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, visit us at www.xzbn.net.
I have returned for another segment of A Different Perspective. I'm joined by Don Schmitt. We were talking about some of the secret projects that sort of were run by the Air Force in the 50s and 60s, and we know of others that went into the 70s and 80s and beyond that. I think we may have exhausted that from what we can do here without being overly boring. And I
think you clearly have demonstrated, and as others have, that there are still other channels. There are still foreign technology, for example. Not that it would fall under the National Security Agency or anything. So one would like to believe that a steady stream of FOIA, Freedom of Information Act requests to foreign technology might break something free.
But you have to ask the right question. That's always a problem. You have to ask the right question, because if you phrase your question wrong or you ask the wrong question, they'll deny any knowledge of it and you were done.
Absolutely.
And I sent a FOIA request to the White Sands Missile Range. I gave them the date of the document I wanted. I gave them the title of the document I wanted. I gave them the author of the document I wanted. And they said, we've never heard of it. Can you be more specific?
Well, no, I can't. But
no, really, I can't. I've given you everything. So
we can't.
The only thing I didn't tell you is what file cabinet it's in.
I know. Or who filed it, right? Yeah, what
Yeah, there you
secretary
go.
filed it, right?
But well, so there are avenues to be pursued in this, and what gets to me at this point, and I really don't want to get off onto this tangent, but what gets me at this point is what we're finding is levels of bureaucracy above Blue Book that had some sort of responsibility for UFO investigation, which really hasn't been talked about in all the UFO books that have been
Right,
written
right.
and things like that. I mean, I don't remember reading about the aerial phenomenon group in any of these books or anything, but clearly it's in the Project Blue Book files, and I probably shouldn't tell people where it is because then they'll go out and look at them themselves. But it's in in the administrative files, and I found all this information there. And one of the questions that came back to me was, do we have the names of these people? And I actually found a roster. So yeah, I got the names of the people who are involved in some of this stuff, so we can run with it. By the way, Colonel Friend, or well, eventually Colonel Friend, who was one of the chiefs of Project Blue Book, is involved with the aerial phenomenon group.
Yes,
So
yes.
it's kind of a two-edged sword there.
And last
yes,
I even had dinner with Colonel Friend out in Los Angeles, and I peppered him with questions as far as not only Roswell, but his tenure as far as project director at Blue Book. He was the second last one, as you know, before Quintanilla. And all at once, he volunteers, I was at Wright Field when that wreckage came in. And, after I kind of crawled back onto my chair, I went, "You're kidding. You never mentioned this before, and I've never seen this in print anywhere." He says, "Yes, but I'm convinced it was a broken arrow," that type of thing.
And broken arrow, we should define for people, is a type of nuclear accident.
An errant, atomic bomb or a nuclear device, right?
But it's a code name that the Air Force used for an emergency operation they had to do. It was a broken arrow, and it gives people an idea of what it was, or the people who were responding, what it was and what was going on there. So,
but at the very least, what he was demonstrating is that he in no way accepted that it was Project Mogul or anything of that sort. That he still felt that it rose to that level, and for his admission that he was actually there at the time, it suggested that well beyond, General Roger Ramey even canceling the resumption of that flight out of Fort Worth to Wright Field with the wreckage brought in by Major Marcel from Roswell, that here was just as Exxon, that Friend was aware of the arrival of the so-called Roswell debris at that time.
if you'd given me a chance to break in there, I could have made a joke about you saying rise to the occasion or rising to the event, because of course a balloon would rise. But
yes,
I won't do that because we have to be serious here, and I don't know why. I sometimes wonder if we're much too serious.
Well, you and I laughed a lot together. I mean, we often looked on the light side of things, and it's the world is too serious.
Yeah, and it's getting more hate-filled too, which is way too bad. But that's for a different program, not this one here. I wanted to talk to you briefly. Well, a nice segue into what I wanted to get into, and that was things going on in MUFON, which for me, I guess, began with a very racist rant posted to Facebook.
So speaking of hateful, yeah.
Yeah, and that was the segue right there. And I know that there's been quite a bit of fallout from that.
Well, you and I were both with the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization.
APRO.
And we both had loyalty to both Coral and Jim Lorenzen. And we both remember how betrayed, specifically Coral, felt when Walt Andrus back at that time essentially took APRO's membership list and created his own group, created his own organization.
Well, what Coral had told me was that Andrus had suggested that what he wanted to do was organize the Midwest field investigators, and the original organization was the Midwest UFO network.
Whereas Lorenzens at that time were down in Tucson, Arizona.
Yeah, so he was going to organize it, and so there wouldn't be a duplication of effort and that sort of thing. And then he spun it off into his own organization, which is one of the reasons I never joined it. I could, as you say, a certain amount of loyalty to the Lorenzens, who were always very good to me on that sort of thing.
Same here, absolutely. But
But I think we need to move into the 21st century.
Well, yes, but
And,
though
and
I'd like to just briefly, just touch on.
never contradict the host.
Okay, I'm not
No,
contradicting.
you were
but-
going to say. I'm sorry. You were going to say.
But where we would be able to present the United Front on the fact that, as you recall, you and I couldn't do anything right by MUFON regarding Roswell. We couldn't
Yes.
write anything. We couldn't. Our books were summarily attacked for no other reason than it was competition. And I'll never forget how I just confronted Walter Andrus at one point, and I finally asked him. I said, "What's the problem?" To which he responded, "Well, if you guys keep this up, you're going to put us out of business."
Oh, I wish we'd worked harder then.
And that said everything. In other
Well,
words,
Walt Andrus came up to me at one of the symposiums I was invited to speak at, and he was just livid. Where are you guys getting your money? It was as if we were taking money out of his pocket, out of his organization, to run our investigation. And I said, we're financing it ourselves. I never got a dime of anything other than in advance for the books and some royalties for the books, which basically paid the expenses that we'd run up in our investigation. But it cost a lot of money.
Our phone expenses alone back at that time were phenomenal.
Well, that's dating us as well, because in today's environment, you can call all over the world practically for nothing.
Exactly.
But yeah, the phone expenses were huge. There was hotel bills, there were meals, there was travel expenses.
I mean, we made it a point to meet with the witnesses. We wanted to sit down and speak with them face to face. So we were traveling all over the country.
And one of the important points is there, and we'll get back to MUFON in a minute, but one of the important points in that kind of an investigation is being able to sit in the room with the person and watch their body language, watch how they react to things. And one of the best examples of that was when we were talking to Sheridan Cavett, who was the counterintelligence agent that went out with Marcel. And we're at their apartment in Sierra Vista, Arizona. Arizona, not far from the Church's Fried Chicken. Always got to get a plug for them there. But I was talking to Cavett, and I said something about the bodies, and he got very nervous. He leaned forward, he picked up a magazine, he sat back, he threw the magazine down and said, "Bill Rickett tell you that?"
Yes.
And there I made the mistake of saying, "No, we got it from Edwin Easley," and he relaxed visibly, and I realized that I'd blown the question there. I should have said, but I didn't want to get Bill Rickett into trouble.
No, and as we recall,
because he was an important witness as well.
And as we recall, Cavett would eventually call up Rickett, wanting to know who he was talking to about this. You recall that Cavett was sitting on the sofa between us.
Yes.
And at one point, as we had planned, I turned and started to engage Mary, his wife, in almost a separate conversation. And there Cavett was trying to listen to both sides, listen to you and listen to me, as well as the responses of Mary. And all at once, he pushed himself ahead from the sofa and he said, "I can't listen to both of you talk at the same time." Well, why are you trying? Why are you making such an effort? Why are you so concerned as to what your wife might volunteer?
And that was the whole point, is trying to involve them both in conversation so that we could kind of learn a little bit more. But Cavett was always very, very, he was always very cordial. He was always very cordial, but he was always very, very careful in what he said to us about the events. And in fact, I know that he lied to us a couple of times, because you remember when we visited him in Sequim, Washington, it was after Weaver had been out there to talk to him, and he denied any knowledge of that.
Well, the way Mary, all of a sudden, we were just getting ready to leave. We were standing by the car, and all at once, Mary blurts out, "Tell the boys about the colonel from the Pentagon who just visited you."
Yeah.
And his look of daggers, towards her, and he just shot. Yeah, and I told him exactly as I told you. I don't know nothing. I wasn't involved. That type of thing.
And of course, that was a blatant lie, because when you read the report that came out from the Air Force, he was directly involved.
He's the star witness. Yeah.
Yeah, well, he went out there. Well, remember, he told us, and I remember this, he told us that they were too busy, he and Rickett and the people in counterintelligence, he was too busy with what he had to do to be involved in any balloon recoveries.
Right.
And then he tells Weaver, "Yeah, I recognized it as a balloon the minute I saw it." And I'm thinking, did you bother to communicate this rather important piece of intelligence to Marcel, who's standing with you? You know, Jess, it's a balloon, for God's sakes.
Or how
Don't get
about
all bent
even-
out of shape.
Or Colonel Blanchard. You know?
Yes. But I remember saying to him, Marcel talks about the guy, Brazel saddling 2 horses, and Marcel drives out there, and he and Brazel get up on the horses. You know, he was a good old West Texas boy, could ride horses and that sort of thing. He says, well, it sounds like me, but I wasn't there. Well,
yes.
maybe you were there from what you told Colonel Weaver.
I wasn't involved. I wasn't even at Roswell. I mean, we went through that whole chain of events where leading right up to his interview with Weaver. And as you said, I mean, we both caught him more than a half a dozen times, clearly, falsifying information with us.
We're coming up close to another break here, so I thought I'd interrupt you and get that process started. But you notice how the conversation devolved again into Roswell. I'm trying to talk about MUFON and what's going on today, and suddenly we're talking about Roswell and witnesses that we had interviewed more years ago than I care to remember. I'm here with Don Schmitt. It's RoswellInvestigator.com. His books include Witness to Roswell and Children of Roswell, and I forget the name of the book from Wright-Patterson Air Force Base.
Inside the Real Area 51, the secret.
There you go.
Wright-Patterson. Right.
And if you are interested in what we were talking about with General Exxon, who was the base commander in the 1960s at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, you can take a look at my blog at www.kevinrandle.blogspot.com. And if you want to initiate an argument with Don, take a look at Roswell in the 21st century, because it suggests some things here that Don may not be complete agreement with, but I think is pretty accurate information. And if you get a chance, take a look at some of the other fine programs on the X Zone Broadcast Network. We will be back right after a few missions, but once again, take a look at www.kevinrandle.blogspot.com for more information. So when we get back, we'll talk about MUFON maybe.
This is the X Zone Broadcast Network, broadcasting worldwide on broadcast affiliates and satellite program providers, including CNN Broadcast Network, Sirius Satellite Network, Star Media, Good News Radio Network, Angel Broadcast Network, Wiki Broadcast Network, and WPBN TV. For more information on the X Zone Broadcast Network, visit us at www.xzbn.net.
Did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or Wi-Fi, you can still listen to the X Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell, The Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, X-1, Dimension X, Space Patrol, and every minute of the X Zone Broadcast Network by calling 213-401-0080, courtesy of Audio Now. No smartphone, app, or internet needed. It saves your data plan and it's free if you have unlimited minutes. Call 213-401-0080 to listen on any phone, anytime, anywhere. Remember 213-401-0080 for the best of the paranormal, parapsychology, and sci-fi radio programming anywhere, 24/7, 365.
I promised just a few minutes ago that we would be back, and here we are already. I'm joined by Don Schmitt. We were talking about Roswell again. I don't know how we keep getting on that topic. But no matter what question I pose, we end up in Roswell. I don't get it myself. Anyway, we were kind of talking about MUFON, and I wanted to bring it into the 21st century and some of the activities that have taken place over the last few months at MUFON with the Pennsylvania State Director. I think it was also the Delaware State Director making posting a very racist rant on his Facebook page, and then the reaction of the MUFON staff and some of the things going on. How cognizant are you of what's going on in MUFON in today's environment? You keep up with a lot of people in MUFON. Do you know a lot of the people in MUFON?
Well, I've had, and as I know you have, wonderful support on the state level. There are some truly amazing state chapters that are, still conducting actual field investigation. They have a great solid core of volunteers, of participants, and unfortunately they're being washed all with the same brush at the moment. And you and I both observed over the last number of years that for the quick transition of one director after another, as though nobody wanted to man the ship, so to speak. That they realized maybe there was a slow leak and they needed to bail before something more serious took place. And then this slow evolution into, well, we need to almost like increase the umbrella, increase the size of the tent. We need to invite as far as Stephen Greer to our symposiums. We need to start looking back at Billy Meyer once again, and maybe we missed something. And I look back, and that's how we keep coming back to Roswell, because I keep thinking, but look at how shabbily they treated us when we were actually, trying to solve this once and for all. And we couldn't get, the time of day from MUFON at one point.
Well, to be fair, Dennis Stacy offered us multiple opportunities to respond in the MUFON Journal.
Key point, key word, respond. But it was
he would get an article. I mean, as an editor of a magazine, you get an article, and it's an interesting article, and it deals with a topic that your readers are interested in, and you want to publish that article. But before he would publish it, he would send a copy to me and say, what would you like to say in response to this? How would you like to talk about this? So I mean, Stacy and MUFON at that time, as encapsulated in Stacy, was very fair with some of that stuff that was going on. It was at the higher echelons that we were getting into, when we were getting into trouble, but getting a lack of respect because.
And Dennis, he was the editor of the MUFON Journal, and you are correct that we would submit articles or we would agree to respond to. At times, a bit of a hatchet piece, so to speak. But as you also allude to the fact, it was being shot down from the higher ups. That it was Walt Andrews specifically was saying they're not getting, an opportunity to respond, and Dennis would have to bow to such wishes. But I don't deny it. Dennis, he was more than neutral and fair. Minded as far as all aspects of the case, and you look back, and those were the prime days of MUFON in retrospect.
And they've now moved into, we can say, more a new agey approach. The latest symposium had a couple of guys who claimed to be time travelers.
But that's kind of the irony, not to interrupt you, but the irony even with Walt Andrews, that if one were to really, talk to people who knew Walt, he believed UFOs were angels. In fact, his wife was into channeling. So Walt himself, in fact, I'll never forget, and you and I were at the symposium at the Convention Center in Albuquerque. And I'll never forget because we knew the young lady at that time who was the state director of New Mexico, and she complained to us quite seriously that she had instructions for Walt that she was to create more of a new age theme, that they needed to expand, attract a much larger audience. So it was even happening 25 years ago.
Oh, absolutely. And looking at the paranormal, you've got a much broader base to draw in than if you just narrow it to UFOs. Even when we expand it into all the ancillary areas that really have very little to do with UFOs, and I think of crop circles and cattle mutilations as two areas that really do not belong in the UFO Parthenon, if you want.
Agreed. In fact, do you remember my theory about cattle mutilations?
It was done by McDonald's for hamburgers?
Well, if you recall, and you do, certainly, the investigation by Senator Harrison Schmitt of New Mexico. when they
last man to walk on the moon.
Precisely. But as a state senator at that time, they conducted an actual investigation into the
a state senator or a United States senator?
United States senator,
Okay.
as I recall.
Yes.
And nonetheless, the fact that it was the most of the cat mutilations were predominantly in New Mexico and Colorado, and I would always ask, now, what is the one constant theme between those two states? And then if you were to check the jet stream for June of 1945, and then the fallout from Trinity. So it's long been my supposition that what we're dealing with are just unmarked helicopters that are constantly testing cattle, taking soft tissue samples, and discarding the carcass, dropping it back down to the ground, no tracks, no footprints, and just like Area 51, creating this false premise that it's a smokescreen for something else.
Well, I would disagree that the cattle mutilations were limited or mainly in New Mexico and Colorado. Having looked into this many times, and one time Jim Lorenzen actually called me and says, there's cattle mutilations in Minnesota. Can you go take a look at it? Which I did. So you can take a look at, the cattle mutilations. There are an awful lot of them around the country. And I think a lot of it dealt not with any kind of government project, but was because people were talking about mutilation of a cow that had died and been attacked by scavengers, and it was suddenly a mutilated cow as opposed to something that would have been. And I do know of one. I investigated one in Wisconsin, actually, Grant County, Wisconsin, and the vet there was Dr. Jefferson Davis. It always cracked me up, Jefferson Davis in Wisconsin.
Yes,
and
right.
And he told me about a farmer.
Does he have a statue anywhere? No kidding.
No. It's in Richmond, Virginia, if it hasn't been pulled down yet.
If it has been pulled.
But he told me about a farmer who had a cow that had been sickly, and if it died of its disease, he got no insurance money. But if it was killed and mutilated, then he got the insurance money. He had done the mutilations himself for the insurance money. I mean, he was engaging in insurance fraud, but it wasn't standard mutilations either. It was just you cut off a couple of lips and an ear or something.
Right.
But the point simply is they were talking about a mutilation, and they had some investigator that showed up. He had a big UFO investigator on the side of his van. That's what it said, UFO investigator. And he came into town and says, every time we get a UFO sighting, now we get a cattle mutilation. So, I mean, I think it was more hysteria than anything that was actually going on. It
was. And I think that, again, getting back to the fact that New Mexico actually conducted a study suggesting that a large majority of the cases were through New Mexico and Colorado, and certainly there have been cases throughout the country, and could very well be around the world, but and most could be attributed to predators and religious cults, and the fact that they were relying on veterinarians to examine a carcass when they should have been bringing in animal pathologists who actually knew what to look for in such cases.
Well, Don, I have to tell you, it's been fun.
We've covered.
Somehow in that segment, we did not get back to Roswell, which is a good thing, or in this segment.
And we didn't crop circles, my God.
No, and I didn't get to ask you about the Children of Roswell either, because I had some questions about that book, but we'll have to leave that for another time.
Or another time.
The website is roswellinvestigators.com. Your latest book is Children of Roswell?
No, the new book is Cover Up at Roswell.
Okay.
This came out in last month, yes.
So you're milking the Roswell cow once again.
Well, I wouldn't say milking it as much as taking a whole different approach and focusing strictly on the activity of suppression, what they did to the press, what they did to the civilians, as well as the military in essentially shutting this all down, and what they've even done to the present, the contemporary, with the late Congressman Stephen Schiff, and even throwing in Senator Goldwater, and even former presidents like Carter and Clinton.
Well, but we are out of time, I can't help it. We're out of time. You got to plug in for your new book. I got to get a plug in for mine here in a moment here. But if you want to know more about what Don and I were talking about, General Lexon, for example, and some of the things about going on in MUFON, take a look at www.kevinrandall.blogspot.com. My book was Roswell in the 21st Century, and the next one is Contact in the Desert, which deals with the Socorro UFO case, with, I think, some additional and more interesting information there. I will return in 167 hours with another episode here. I think next week, because we've hit the year anniversary, the year mark, I'm going to do the retrospective, which I promised to do periodically on the program, give you an idea of what we've talked about and things that we have done. So you'll have an opportunity to listen to that. Let's listen to me ramble on for a little bit about what's going on. But as I say, take a look at www.kevinrandall.blogspot.com. And if you have a chance, take a look at xzbn.net for some of the other fine programs on the X Zone Broadcast Network. We will be here next week.